I take Putin at his word. I think, he's very angry, but I also think he understands. I think he's a lot smarter than Biden, and he understands what they're doing, or this current administration. I think he's probably got speed dial of Trump on it. I'm sure they're talking. I hope they are. Hopefully he understands. He just got to hold out a little bit longer. But yeah, these missiles that are made in the United States are long range, and they're flying into the heart of Russia. That's. Imagine it was Mexico we were in a war with, and they had funded $200 billion and gave MiG jets and missiles that were flying into Kansas. Would we be okay with that? That's a provocation of war. It is, and thank God that he hasn't retaliated in a much more vengeful way. You could argue he has a right to. And if it were the other way around, people would be screaming, we have to retaliate. Hopefully it doesn't. I do hope it doesn't. I think that the trade wars are real, and there's a potential that the BRICS countries could say, you know what, we don't care anymore. We represent roughly 50% of the global GDP right now, and control the majority of the strategic shipping lanes and on-ground lanes and much of the production of the commodities that are needed to make the world go round, from precious metals to wheat and to soft commodities, to rare earths, to all of the countries that they're in partnership with, and are building under their Belt Road Initiative, which right now is the majority of human population. It's 150 plus countries, the majority of it on the Belt Road. These are all, most of them, underdeveloped, resource-rich countries. They don't need, probably, to trade with the United States. It's a big statement to say, but they are growing at a pace where maybe they could go it alone if they had to. Now, I'm not saying they're going to, but you're going to see an escalation in trade wars for sure. And we just want to hope that these folks understand that, Trump may be overplaying his card, and he may be just kind of setting the bar high, willing to back off. That's the deal of, the art and I don't know. I just think that we have a much greater possibility of making it through this without getting into a very hot war when they understand who's coming in, and taking aim at the folks that have created this mess. So let's hope cooler heads prevail. But yeah, I do think that we're going to see much, much higher prices to the consumer. If indeed we do see these tariffs and these sanctions, it will only affect the consumer in the end, who will pay much higher prices for goods that we're getting from all of these countries. Not only that, the componentry or the natural resources that are needed to make things that we make. So yeah, I don't know how well thought out it is, but I would expect higher prices or price inflation, certainly just with the tariff threats against Canada and Mexico and China, independent of any of the BRICS types of threats that he's made with 100% tariffs and whatnot. Ultimately has to be higher. You can't have a weak dollar. You can't have low interest rates without expecting to have much higher inflation. And it's very inflationary by nature. You add on to it tariffs, which will only be a responsibility of the end user consumer, who it's not going to be these countries that are paying these or paying the fees. They're going to pass it on in the form of higher prices. Sorry, the sun's right in my eyes. I would expect, then again, that inflation only gets worse moving forward, and maybe considerably worse before it gets better. I don't think there's any way around that. And then it comes into play, who finances all the unfunded liabilities that we have, the near $200 trillion. No one even talks about those. So inflation has to come. There's no way around it. And either that or you just blow up the whole system and start over. But inflation is here, and it's only going to get worse. The tariffs will make it bad. The weak dollar will make it bad. The low interest rates will make it bad. The removal of restrictions will increase inflation and will increase productivity, but will increase inflation. The removal of taxes or the lowering of taxes will increase inflation. All of this is inflationary. And I think that is the policy that they have chosen, and it's where they're going. And again, another reason to not be reliant on keeping your wealth in U.S. dollars. It will be inflated away right out from underneath you. It's a whole heck of a lot easier than going out right into a depression. You raise interest rates high enough, you're going into a depression. You bankrupt the banks, you blow up the banks, you make it impossible for businesses to raise capital in a much more highly high cost of money environment, and that spills all the way down, to, well, the labor market and to the end users. There really isn't an easy way out of this, and I think it's much less painful to choose inflation over raising rates and trying to tighten your belt, which will have massive ramifications across the economy, starting with the banks. So to me, it's the lesser of two evils. It's what they've always chosen. It's what they will choose this time too. If you keep your money in the big banks, you're crazy. I mean, that's just all there is to it. And you're right, the commercial real estate problem hasn't even really played out yet. There's an awful lot of these loans that will need to be reset in 2025 at double the cost of money from where they previously were locked in. Not to mention, the regional banks own 70% of all the small business loans and leases. So it's not a warm, fuzzy picture for the banking industry, and the traditional forms of liquidity that we've seen over the last year in the reverse repo market and in the BFTP, the bank BTFP, the Bank Term Funding Program, are both basically at zero. So yeah, I would expect there to be many more consolidations in the banking industry, and I think that is ultimately what they want. They want to consolidate the banks. Certainly the Federal Reserve wants to consolidate the banks. And yeah, I think the banking problem is nowhere near over yet, not even remotely close to it. Trump is not coming and fixing that at all. That's a problem that has to work itself out. And if indeed we see more of the same, where they try and lower the federal funds rate, but the back end of the curve keeps going higher, the 10 and the 30, well, that's what the banks are loaded up on, 10-year treasuries. And so it only destabilizes the banks even more. It only makes the resetting of loans, higher mortgage rates, higher lease rates worse. And, the Fed doesn't control the back end of the bond market. If they do, then that's monetization of debt. They go in and impose yield curve control. They're the only ones dumb enough to buy the 10-year and the 30-year, and that's hyperinflation, or the seeds of it. That's what Alistair is basically saying, that we're too far down the debt rabbit hole. If you go and fix the debt and tighten your belt, you blow up the economy, because that means higher rates. And the other way is, if you choose inflation, well, you better not be fully loaded up in dollars. And yes, it's easy for me to say buy gold and silver. I could argue that buying, even the stock market will go parabolically higher. Doesn't mean it won't correct, because the major value is holed up in a handful of stocks. But all of these assets could do very well. Cryptos could, stocks could, and commodities should in this environment. But the other thing that I think about a lot, and maybe I'm way off base, you're in this market for so long, I am, and you start to think, like, where is the line between conspiracy and reality? I think about if there is a deep state who is trying to dismantle, the one way to get them would be to pull the rug, right, on the banks or on the market, however they would intend to do that. You have three massive bubbles of money, where you have 7 or 8 trillion in money markets. You got the majority of all the wealth in the stock market in a handful of stocks, and you got everyone now running into crypto. It's not hard, I would think, for these folks to pull the plug and then blame everything on Trump, his administration, his crazy, radical policies, and go right back down that same horrible place that we've been for the last 4 years. That makes me nervous. Is it way off base? Maybe. I don't know, but I think about those things, because if you don't think about those things, you have a very short memory. Think of all the craziness we've seen in the last 4 years. These people aren't going to go out without a fight. And if indeed the only way to get them, short of, God forbid, killing them, which I hope for his safety every day and pray for it, is you blow up the system and blame him for his policies and his cabinet and his radical agenda. And that's the reason why that it happened. And because he's only got 4 years, right? And we hope that he has 12, him, and then, maybe it's President Vance then for 8 years. If it's only 4 years, that means we're in trouble. That means that he will be blamed for whatever happened moving forward, rather than the realization that he's the only one with the courage to stand up to get us on the right path. but that means you have to go through a period of time of great difficulty. And that's the part that I think people are underestimating. We should be very excited that his policies are addressing the problems. But to Alistair's point, you get far enough down the rabbit hole as we have, there is no easy way out without a reset, or maybe that's what he understands, or without a default, or without a massive inflationary, situation to be able to service an ever-increasing debt and the fiscal irresponsibility. Even with the Doge committee, look, we're still going to have $1 trillion+ deficit again. And so he comes in with a $36.5 trillion debt and leaves with a $41.5 trillion debt. It is not sustainable in the long run.